Are scary enough. Okay. I don't need that. Once in a great while.
Mid-90s.
C.S. Lewis is
My grandmother was 305,
trilogy.
and I resemble her in many ways.
Yeah,
but I am just
and makes me the odd man out
and slightly
at
horrified
work
at the
because
prospect of being slowly shooted because she was not happy about it.
they'll be talking about what they're reading
Such
on
a
this
good but it was
company
like,
that's semi-related to.
Hi, Gail. How are you doing? You didn't catch the calls, did you? A little bit.
my grandma,
Commits to 30 versus
that's exactly what
more
my
than 6
grandma said. I don't have any peers,
Right,
Um,
right.
so, yeah. And she, she knew this scuttlebutt on everybody in the retirement community because she'd been around longer than any of them, but
Those guys will drive by and then
But-
in the heat of
but
summer, if it looks
living
like that,
in the retirement community,
they won't do
she
it.
also
So
ended up getting married again after my
we're
grandma.
not meeting
Right.
Monday.
And, so that was a huge gift for both of
Yeah, I
them.
think,
So.
ours
Morning, Zach.
will be at least,
You look like you're just thinking about waking up and
Yeah,
not
so do
really
you
liking
use
the prospect.
I figured out my little tiny one.
It all was
I
there.
Every week in the spring.
So can I say it's because it's an hour earlier that we don't have many people here?
Could be.
Other than,
Absolutely.
you know, in contrast to
I've got a big
my
one.
topic and later, yeah.
I thought that your title was completely provocative, so why wouldn't they come running?
Yeah, it's a pretty provocative story. Yeah, a beauty pageant winner saves God's people. If
That
you're,
is
let's see,
one,
a couple of you were at worship, so you've already heard the story. And a couple of you were at Bible Study Tuesday when we worked through the story. And I'll give a little summary of it in a little bit too. But if you're staying for second service, that will comprise the sermon for the most part. Well, last week, Pastor Lori mentioned different methods of interpretation of Scripture, two of them being historical criticism and literary criticism, and we're going to look at both of those in relation to Esther a little bit. The book of Esther was written, and by the way, two people told me on the way out this morning that they had never ever heard that story or read the book of Esther. That's and right. really, unless you, I think if you're female and you've been in study of women of the Bible, you may have come across that story, but you know, lots of folks haven't. It was written during what they call the Persian period from 538 BC to 333 BC. It's a story from the diaspora. It's after the time of the exile when Jerusalem's destroyed, people have been taken into exile in Babylon, and many folks chose to stay in Babylon after some returned, and the Jews are beginning to be scattered throughout the region. It's somewhat like a historical novel because you know how historical novels work. They take a couple real things from history and then build a story around it. The name of God is never once mentioned in the book, which the first time I found that out, it's actually in the Bible, and God's name is not in there, but as you'll see in this story, there are places that it's implied, at least for folks who have faith, that God is behind certain things that happen. It's sometimes also called a festal legend because it tells why there is a festival of Purim, which is a Jewish holiday. The word pur means casting lots, and so Purim is the casting of lots. And we have some festal legends. Can you think of any?
Easter.
Yeah. Easter, Christmas, stories that tell why we celebrate when we did. Now, those we consider grounded in history, in real time. But I was thinking about Thanksgiving, the legend that you learned in grade school about Thanksgiving turns out not to be,
So true.
yeah, so true, right? Yeah.
At all.
Well-
For Columbus being first?
Oh, yeah, there you go.
Because
There's
no
another
one's
one.
here when he
Uh-huh.
did.
That's right. Columbus discovered a new world. Well, on Purim, the festival for the Jews, this story is often played out on stage as a melodrama. And in a melodrama, people hiss when the villain comes on stage, or boo, and people cheer when the hero comes on stage. Has anybody ever been to the Melodrama Theater in Wallace?
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
We love it.
yeah, Dale and I have been there, and it's fun. You got somebody playing the piano who was actually the organist of the Lutheran Church, but you know, real lively, and music plays a part often, especially in the Victorian era when this became very popular, and the music, think of Phantom of the Opera, things like that, you know, where the music is going up, you know, to hide the, yeah, all that kind of stuff. So,
So are you gonna encourage us to hiss and boo in the late service? or-
I know. Somebody already asked me if they could do that.
It was a good thing that we were wearing masks because you couldn't see that
Yeah,
someone was
yeah,
listening.
whatever you want to do. So here's the definition of modern melodrama: is a dramatic work in which the plot typically relies on action instead of character development or dialogue. Characters are often written to fulfill certain stereotypes. Melodramas are typically focusing on morality, family issues, love, and marriage, often with challenges from an outside source. The villain comes outside of the group, a scoundrel. Melodrama on stage, film, or television is usually accompanied by dramatic music that give you cues as to what is happening. In scholarly and historical musical context, melodramas are Victorian dramas in which orchestral music or song was used to accompany the action. I think even the early silent films were often melodrama, you know, that kind of thing. Oh, you know, I was going to do this and I forgot. Okay, when I was a counselor at Luca Haven, I don't know how we got this going, but we used to do this thing. We had a skit night, and one of them was, I can't pay the rent, I can't pay the rent, I can't pay the rent tonight. You must pay the rent, you must pay the rent tonight. I'll pay the rent, my hero. So, our own little very short melodrama.
That's Kate's version. My version is Monty. It's Monty Python or the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Oh, yeah. You mentioned that when we were talking about it. I'm not as familiar with that to be able to use
That is
that.
weird.
So you
I don't think
have,
the Rocky Horror Picture Show is a good example.
I'm just saying.
yeah, I know.
It's a generational thing.
So the characters are often exaggerated, as you can see. Here's a villain. Here's, you know, the sweet male character that's the victim usually. And this is where the story of Esther takes a twist, because the woman is the hero in this story. So here's a story, a hero of a typical old-time melodrama. And then you also often have a sidekick. You know, someone that functions, sometimes the hero has a sidekick, sometimes the villain has a sidekick. Here's a hero who's a sidekick of a hero, helping that person out. How many of you remember Snidely Whiplash? You have to be a boomer, guys, sorry. It was a boomer cartoon when we were young, Snidely Whiplash, Sweet now, Dudley Do Right. Now here's a somewhat more contemporary, I mean, maybe my kids, of a hero. Yeah. Shrek, the unlikely hero. Here's the sidekick to Snidely Whiplash. Mutty was his name, M-U-T-T-Y, and he has this evil smile, and he had this really evil chuckle. I just heard somebody do it. He'd be the one like pushing down the dynamite plunger. And usually in these old-time melodramas, the plot was the evil villain ties the girl to the train tracks, and yeah, okay. Well, back to somewhat more real situation. This is the Persian Empire. I mean, it really was quite incredible. It went all the way over and took part of India, you know, and all across what, you know, this says Parthia, Crimea, Mesopotamia, you know, but we know Afghanistan, Iran, you know, and all the way into what's Libya, and Egypt and Ethiopia. So it was really quite incredible. And
So that's the, oh, okay, the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea. Okay.
yeah, so this gives you an idea of 127 provinces that are mentioned in the book of Esther a couple times. So you can see just by all these names, you know, all these different provinces. Oh, and here's a look at you know, contemporary countries. So it gives you an idea of the incredible range of that. So in our story, we have King Ahasuerus, and many people think that this was King Xerxes.
3 of the 4 Bible, in my parallel Bible say Xerxes.
Oh, instead of Ahasuerus,
Yeah.
okay, yeah. So I guess that's pretty well accepted. He's really more of a sidekick than anything, because he's kind of inept and dopey, and he lets his advisors tell him what to do, so, yeah.
Don't tell them that.
Yeah. And so then here is our heroine, Esther. And then if she has a sidekick, and he's not he's a big player though. This is Mordecai, her adoptive father, who was her cousin. She was orphaned though. And here we have one illustration of Haman, the bad guy. So we have Haman, who is an advisor, the top advisor at one point to the king, an enemy of the Jews, ambitious and vengeful. We have Esther, young and beautiful, raised by a cousin, unworldly, but she uses her charms. Mordecai, the cousin who raised Esther, wise and faithful and shrewd. And the king, impulsive, impressionable, generally inept. So I'm going to skip around in the story and just give you the main parts. When the Queen Vashti has been banished, so a servant comes up with the idea that, oh, you should have a girl from every province, a young virgin, come to the palace and be groomed and have a tryout of spending a night with the king. Which for us is just like, you know, sexual trafficking, you know, all that kind of stuff. But we have to put it in the context of the times. This is where historical criticism comes in, that it was a very patriarchal system. Women were property, etc., 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 right?
Well, Vashti lost her place because she wouldn't run nude through the
Yeah. And that is
banquet.
actually not explicit in the story, in scripture, but that's the rabbinical, in the Midrash, the rabbinical interpretation is that she was asked to wear only her crown, is why she refused. Okay. So, you know, Mordecai brings Esther to the harem to be one of the beauties trying out. And it turns out when it's after a couple months or a few months of pampering and cosmetics, it says, and perfumes, and It's her turn, and it says that the king loved Esther more than any other girl. Okay, so she gets crowned, and then Haman is elevated to this right-hand man position, and all the servants have to bow down when he walks by, and Mordecai won't do it. Because Jews don't do that. And so he hates Mordecai, and he wants to destroy all the Jews, tells the king there's this whole group of people throughout the empire that are lawless. They will not follow the laws, and we've got to do something about them. And the king is just kind of like, oh, whatever, here's my signet ring, and you take care of it, do whatever you want. So he casts lots, that's where the lot bit comes in, to find the most auspicious day, and sends out this decree to all the provinces. Now, everything in this type of story, it's always all, and there's so many, and you know, that's how you heighten the drama. It goes out to all 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia, you know, it says, and saying that on the 13th day of the 12th month of Adar, people may kill every Jewish man, woman, and child in all the provinces. So Mordecai hears about it, and he's sitting at the gate wailing in ashes and all this. And Esther hears that Mordecai's doing that and wants to know why. And servants go back and forth between them. And he sends her a copy of the decree and wants her to go see the king. She says, I can't, because you can't come into the king's court uninvited, or you could be killed. The lie is that you will be killed, unless he holds out the golden scepter. And Mordecai then sends back a message that has the heart of this whole thing in, you know, you will not, don't think you'll escape death just because you're in the palace. Who knows but what you were placed as royalty for just such a time as this. That's why our series is called Just Such a Time as This, from this particular story. So that's a bit of literary criticism for a moment, because what did you learn in composition about how to begin? You put a thesis statement, right, in the first paragraph, and then all your stuff that supports that, and at the very end of your essay or paper, you put your conclusion. Well, much of Hebrew literature works exactly opposite to that. It's more of this kind of a shape, and the most important point is in the very middle of the story. So you've got the build-up, and then you've got the main point, and then you've got the results of that. You'll see that in many of the Psalms, if you take a look at them. Look right around the middle. Of course, they didn't have chapters and verses when these were first written down. That's been a later addition. But this comes in the book of Esther at the end of chapter 4, and there are 10 chapters, so you can see that it's almost right in the middle of that, which is kind of fun. So, Esther agrees to do it, and she asks Mordecai to have all the Jews in Susa fast for 3 days. Now, it's really interesting, all the different commentaries I was reading, many of them say that they were asked to fast and pray. The word pray is not in the original text, but it's our assumption, isn't it? Why do people fast in the Jewish tradition? They fast and pray. Why do people fast in the Christian tradition? We fast and pray. So that's an assumption, you know, that people of faith read into this. And she puts on her royal robes on the 3rd day, and she goes in, and he holds out the golden scepter and asks for her request. She only invites him and Haman to dinner that day, and when they come, and the king asks, what's your request? She says, will you please come to dinner again tomorrow? So I guess she didn't quite have the gumption yet, or the timing wasn't right to tell the king what she wanted. Haman is so pleased, you know, and as he goes in, so prideful that he's been invited to the queen. Then he sees Mordecai, who totally ruins his mood, and he complains to his wife and family, who said, you should build a gallows to hang Mordecai on, and so he does. And he's gonna ask the king the next morning, but anyway, you'll hear that in this sermon, what happens with all that. That's a longer story, but it really doesn't work out.
Well, it does work out, just not like he was expecting.
Yeah, not like he was expecting. Exactly. So when they go to Esther's the second time, and the king asks her request, she begs for her life and the life of her people. Now this king is just clueless, because he said, well, who's doing that? You know, and she says the evil Haman. And then the king is very angry, and he walks out into the garden. Haman throws himself on Esther's couch to beg for mercy. King comes back in, thinks that Haman is assaulting his queen, and wonders what to do about it. And one of the servants suggests, hang him on his gallows. And so he does. But isn't it interesting how it's the advisors, the servants, all these different people who have to suggest always to the king. So it's a particular way of the story functioning to make fun of those in power, and to say they really don't have the power that we fear that they do, right? So Haman is hung, his property goes to Esther, who gives it to Mordecai, and the ring goes to Mordecai, the signet ring also. We find out a decree that the king has made cannot be revoked. And so the king tells them they can send out another decree. And they write up one that on that particular day, all the Jews in all the provinces can take up arms, kill anyone who attacks them. And it says that they kill 75,000 people. Now, in these kinds of stories, numbers are usually exaggerated, but nonetheless, how, though, do you think that would function if you're a Jew living under oppression and you're told this story? Yes! You know, when it comes to that part? How about, you know, knowing what we know about the Holocaust and the way Jews have been slaughtered, and then we hear a story like this? There's a certain satisfaction, so to speak. And the king asks Esther if there's anything else she'd like, and she says, yes, I'd like one extra day in Susa, our city, for Jews to be able to kill their enemies. And the king says, oh, sure. You know, yeah. So they send out another edict, Mordecai, at the request of Esther, to all the provinces that they should celebrate this day every year. And actually they should celebrate 2 days for the second day in Susa every year to remember how Esther was courageous and saved her people, and Mordecai always worked for the good of his people also. So there's a few weird little things in there, because one of the things I didn't mention is that when Mordecai wants this initial decree, he offers to pay, I think it's 10,000 silver talents into the royal treasury. Now I don't really get, Haman, sorry, yes, Haman offers to pay that amount of his own money into the treasury, and nothing I really came across explained that exactly.
Oh, he's an oligarch. He's just contributing.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say, except, yeah, and it shows the corruption of the government, the just built-in corruption, how people can get things done that they want because they have money. An oligarch, yeah, thank you. He's
At least he didn't have to give up
privileged.
his yacht.
Yeah.
Yeah, he has this privileged attitude as you read through the story, self-serving actions. He's cunning, but then there's the irony of reversal. And in a little scene that I left out, but also that Mordecai gets the ring. Mordecai ends up with his property. You know, very satisfying in a melodrama to have that kind of thing. Now Esther, she, oh, I kind of forgot about this, didn't I? Esther, Jewish people could probably really relate to her. She is orphaned. She's like the Jews are, without security, without rootedness, without identity before she becomes queen. She's the least powerful gender of the least powerful people among the mighty Persians. And there's one point at which you can tell she doesn't consider herself a player. When she says she can't go in to see the king without being invited, she says, and he hasn't called for me for 30 days. So she obviously doesn't take any initiative ever to be in contact with the king. She waits for him. She is probably only 14 or 15, because if she were any older than that, she would probably be married. And they requested virgins, and so, you know. Anyway, pretty amazing that someone that young could handle all of this in a way.
Oh, she's being coached by Mordecai the whole time.
Yes, that's right. He's the sidekick that is more than a sidekick, and but her personal history intersects with the corporate history of the Jews in terms of that edict and her being where she is. To save her people, Esther had been told by Mordecai, don't tell anybody you're a Jew, when he took her to the palace, or anybody that you're related to me. And so she has to reveal that she's a Jew, which is also very risky when she makes her plea to the king. There's another type of literature that this also might fit under called satire. And it's a genre comprising of irony, sarcasm, or ridicule used to expose or to denounce a person, some folly that took place or a vice. Satire uses humor to expose the empire as a farce, like when we were saying, not really all of the power that we think they have, because look how stupid the king is, and that kind of thing. There are darkly ironic reversals with all that violence, and Haman being hung on the 75 cubit, didn't we?
75 feet, 50 cubits, yeah.
50 cubits, which at our Bible study, Dave looked up for us and found out that that would be about 75 feet tall. I mean, it's just really exaggerated to have a gallows this tall, right? And he builds it to hang Mordecai. Haman is hung on it. And later, when the 10 sons of Haman are hung, they're all hung on this gallows. Now, in looking up pictures and things like that, there's some bunch of really grisly paintings of the 10 sons of Haman being hung. And one of them, the gallows is so high that they are hung one upon another upon another.
You know, the interesting thing about that, though, is, and the gallows just makes me think of what the Romans did with crosses, which is, it was an advertisement as you pass by that you don't let this be you.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah.
And lynchings served the exact same purpose in the
Yeah.
1950s.
Yes.
So we're not that far from
No.
that advertisement.
Well, and it's happening in other areas of the world still. And we think of the Middle Ages or before, when heads were put on pikes at the palace gates, you know, and all those kinds of ways to show
Or
power by extreme violence.
In Iraq, on that bridge,
Yeah? Yeah. Well, I like this quote I came across, John Levinson. A coincidence is a miracle in which God prefers to remain anonymous. Isn't that nice? A coincidence is a miracle in which God prefers to remain anonymous. And so you could think of the book of Esther and the lack of God being named as fitting this quote. For such a time as this, it happens throughout Scripture. It happens throughout history. Can you think of, I mentioned my sermon, the president of the Ukraine being put in a place for such a time as this, but can you think of other people throughout history that seem to fit that, perhaps?
Martin Luther King,
Martin Luther King,
Rosa.
Rosa Parks.
It's Women's History Month, so I mean, like, let's
There
just
you
think
go,
about it.
yeah.
There's a lot more.
Okay. For sure. Sojourner Truth, yeah. Abraham Lincoln,
Harriet Tubman.
Harriet Tubman. You know, Abraham Lincoln, there's, of course, stories that go along with some of these people. How he was born in a log cabin and pretty much self-educated to rise to this position. So a very ordinary person put in an extraordinary position at an extraordinary time, that had the gifts to deal with it in a certain way.
Hamilton.
Yeah.
It's a whole
There is. Yeah. So you can go back through history through just about any country, and think about
Winston Churchill.
Winston Churchill. Yeah, that's one of the first person I thought of the other day. Yeah. And different figures in the church, reformers or, yeah. So we believe that God does that, right? So if God has done that in the past and God is doing it in the future, God can be doing it in our lives also. That we are in a certain place at a certain time to do God's work. And it could be a place that you're already in or something you're already doing. And it could be something that God is calling you to in another way or time. So,
Probably should have said this sooner, but Martin Luther.
yeah.
I remember we were going up to the castle, I forget which one it was, where he was hiding
And Wittenberg, wasn't
The
that
Wartburg. No,
yeah, and, you know, this is like the middle of July, and this thunderstorm comes out of nowhere. And I'm going, oh my God.
Oh, yeah. Just give you a little taste
It
of what
did,
it might
yes.
feel like. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, somebody that could translate scripture into the common language, you know, during that time, and yeah, he just had amazing gifts. Yeah. Well, Esther's story is that of an unlikely hero, a young woman, especially for that time. Not even thinking about Women's History Month, but I was thinking about, I like to read a lot of young adult literature. I kind of started that years ago when I was teaching confirmation, and Harry Potter came out, and one of my good friends who was a high school English teacher said, I've got kids reading who never read. And so I thought, I better read this thing. So I bet you can think of some Hunger Games, you know, with these young women who are often she's a reluctant hero in the Hunger Games. Star Wars, the most recent ones with Rey, the young woman who becomes the last Jedi. Can you think of others? Unlikely women. Divergence, thank you. My husband. He's had to watch all this stuff with me repeatedly.
How about Joan of Arc?
Joan of Arc, yes. Yeah. Very famous. And there are a number of stories of female saints who, many of whom were martyred.
Perpetua.
Yeah. And some of whom lived in isolation as mystics or things like that, you know. But so there's been a genre of literature developing very strongly in the last.
Do you have any more images? I'm tired of looking at that.
Oh. Sorry. I keep forgetting about him. There. Haman begging
There we go.
Esther. Yeah. Well, a good story has the power to incite hope. And that's one of the reasons this story has survived. Can help us hold to our convictions that the grace-filled power of God will ultimately overcome the destructive powers of the world. We need to hear that, don't we? We really need to hear that right now, and there have been many times that there's hardly not a time that we don't need to hear that, but it feels more poignant at certain times. Even the seemingly non-religious story of Esther can function that way. God works to overcome evil. Every development in the plot could be regarded as the expression of divine guidance. Psalm 121, God who keeps Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps, right? God is always onto it, yeah. Okay, where's the one that I made into a bow for my, oh, no, that's the one that was from last Tuesday.
You've had a busy week since Tuesday. You told a good story on Tuesday, but you have really filled it in today.
Yeah, thank you. And had to come up with the sermon.
Yeah.
The sermon's mostly just a retelling of the story until the end. So,
One gentleman that was leaving after the first service said he was gonna go home and read Esther. He's never heard the story. So he was gonna go home and read Esther today. Yeah.
well, I think that I have covered most of what I had, getting my pictures, my things off.
It occurs to me that I'm not sure that there's one story in the collection of stories that will be heard over the course of Lent that doesn't arise out of friction, conflict, political, religious, etc. disease.
Sure. Who have we had so far? We had Samson on Wednesday. We had Samuel last Sunday.
This upcoming Wednesday will be Joseph.
Conflict always. That makes a good story. You think of just about anything you watch in a movie or television, I keep waiting, what's the conflict going to be? There's got to be a conflict to really heighten the power of the story. And that's what we're interested in. How do certain people live through certain times?
I wonder how well the Black church knows the story of Esther. And I say that simply because being a minority in a majority secular culture and rising to power, that would be an encouraging story to
I would guess they know it pretty well when I think of how.
They just know the Bible better than the rest.
I was going to say, when I think of how well they use Old Testament stories.
There are women's groups after Esther, many black churches.
Yeah, that's true. And we've also often, in the old days when we had circles, women's circles, there was often one named Esther, Rachel. I don't think we ever had one named Bathsheba.
No.
No.
Dorcas, though, that was.
Dorcas.
Yeah.
Unfortunate.
Uh-huh.
Wasn't her name Tabitha too, or something?
Yeah, and Lydia, and yeah, those are some of the New Testament people.
This morning on the show called Sunday Morning, they were interviewing a Jewish baker they celebrate on Wednesday, as their holiday, they celebrate the killing of Haman with these pointy little pastries, because it was like his hat. He wore a pointy hat.
Oh, yeah,
And
in the
so
plays,
they-
he's always got this big
Yeah,
place.
so they make these pastries to celebrate the death of Haman.
And that's pretty amazing, isn't it?
It's part of Purim.
Yeah. Yeah, and the
I was
gas.
looking through bakeries last night to see if anybody in town had some. of
Oh,
those.
did you?
Yeah.
No?
No such luck. Not
No
even the
Haman's
Jewish,
hats.
not even the Jewish bakery.
Did you look down at, the grain, what's it, grain shed?
Rain shed.
Do they often carry Jewish types?
Yes.
Histories? Yeah.
That one I
He's
didn't.
Jewish.
Oh,
That one I
okay.
didn't.
Uh-huh.
I'll have to look.
Yeah, I mean, it seems a little gruesome, but, you know, we celebrate a crucifixion.
Well, in
And-
the course of Jewish history, there's
Oh,
a
yeah.
lot of gruesome stuff that went on.
Oh, there
So
is,
this
and so
just
if you can
one
pick
more,
out some,
right?
yeah, if you can pick out some that are encouraging, you know, you can see why that would be done. Dick?
I thought it was interesting that you said that Martin Luther did not like the Book of Esther,
Oh, I said that last Tuesday, yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
and that other early students of history said it should not be part of the Bible.
Yeah, because God's name not.
No mention of God or prayer or.
Right, yeah, so you can see why they think that. I think
But
that-
isn't that part of its appeal now, to me? I mean, I think, like, this is the way people go through their lives, having some sense that they are connected to something bigger than themselves, but not having a name for it or not experiencing, you know, divine intervention.
Not recognizing God's hand in things. That's true among us, but also very true in the broader world. We believe that God can work through believers and non-believers. And that's testified in the scripture in terms of Cyrus, who is called a Messiah at one point because he lets the people of Israel, helps them go back to Judah, and he's pagan. And so God works in many forms, many ways, through many different kinds of people. Who else in this moment of history can you think of that God may be working through? Common everyday people?
Well, I certainly think Zelensky is an unlikely hero.
Yeah.
Maybe the world needs more comedians.
Yeah. But somehow he's just right.
There are all kinds of stories right now coming out about journalists. I heard a story yesterday on the way home from the church about a newscast in which the newscasters actually refused to continue to convey the misinformation and
In
reported
Russia? Is this-
in Russia and reported what was happening. And I can't remember what they did something that was very telling that that actually indicated they knew that this would be the end of their careers and that they would probably end up in
Because
some remote
they've
prison.
made it against the law
Yeah,
to tell the truth about what's going on
yeah.
in Ukraine.
There was, on this show this morning, there was interviewing a girl in Ukraine that was in communication with her mother in Russia, and the mother says that all the strife in Ukraine is done by someone else other than Russia. They are getting the story that it's not Russia that's bombing
Yeah.
Ukraine and everything. And this girl said, "Mother, I'm living it, you know." And she said, "No, I don't believe it."
Oh, yeah, misinformation, it just becomes such a thing
Well,
around the globe, huh?
the other story I heard yesterday that I was like blown away by was this story of these people who have been playing these remote war games with one another, and they actually have created this community where they knew each other across between nations around the Baltics and Russia, and they actually ended up working through WhatsApp to communicate with a guy who was trying to escape with his family from Ukraine, and and they were using the app to give him screenshots of maps so that he could get out of the country. And the way that they had forged a relationship was through this game.
Wow, yeah.
So
A good way of using media.
yeah,
Yeah.
but these relationships had been developed that actually allowed for that to happen.
Yeah, yeah.
There's a Facebook page that I follow it's dressage mastery for riders, and there's a woman who's very, like, she's frequent on the page all the time, and she's in Russia, and she can't access any of the media or any of the page, and so instead of posting like dressage, like help tips, like it's been, they're posting like, his Facebook is being, like, they're censoring what you can put on Facebook, so we're posting messages to her in support of her that don't get like taken down from the censoring of everything, so that she can see that she's still being supported, because she can't be at the bar and she can't be with anybody, and she's like cut off from her area.
That's cool. That's really cool, yeah. Well, and so many people, you know, in this country are doing what they can to help. Our Christian ed person, Katie, who had a carpenter that had worked on the remodeling of her house from Ukraine, who has family over there, and his church, Ukraine Baptist Church, and he gave a list, and so many people have been taking supplies, and then they're getting them over to Poland, and yeah.
Lynn Smith said that Cedar Coffee this week has had lines around the block and had early in the week raised $40,000 for Ukraine. So it's interesting how crises also tend to draw people to a common purpose and the desire to do something in the face of feeling helpless.
We're gonna be giving prayer shawls. I'm getting the prayer
Yeah.
shawls ready that we have here to sing.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah. Well, thank you, everybody. This has been fun.
Have a good week, Gail.
You too.
Unlikely hero. Coming to the rescue.
You know what you're doing, Gil?
Just a
Yeah,
guess.
I thought I did.
Thank you, honey. You're done. We do ready. Save the day. Oh, I know. Are you trying to turn it on? Because there's a button over here.
Over there.